Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Couple of Nerds. I'm your host, DnDWife, and with me is my co-host and husband, Dungeon Master Eguile.
How's it going, everyone?
Welcome. Today is going to be a lore drop segment. I love these lore drop segments because we get to go over all the unique and interesting aspects of our homebrew world. We get to explore the different unique dynamics, the things that we chose specific to the world, which I absolutely love going into. This is my bread and butter.
Oh, yeah. And this is going to be our third of our multi-part series where we're going in specifically into the magic of Extrayus.
Yeah, the magical array. In this case, we are discussing chaos magic as the sort of third part.
Yeah, and so this is kind of that, more unique one in that this is another one of the more created magics, kind of unique to our homebrew campaign, and also kind of to the system that we're playing, because we are playing Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, but it is fairly modified, right? I use a little bit of D&D 1, a little bit of 5th edition, and then a lot of other kind of modules we built. And so this represents another of that kind of uniqueness that our homebrew world kind of represents. And it's really the nice part because it's kind of the other side to creation in that this kind of chaotic energy that is both promoting and destroying of life.
Where cosmic is the creation of all life and therefore order. Chaos is the complete opposite of that. It's unpredictable, it's unwieldy, and you never know what's going to happen.
And it makes for a lot more kind of fun at the table as well.
Oh yeah.
So just like we have been for all of these kind of magical lore drops, we're going to first look into kind of like the creation and concepts that we put behind into chaos magic and kind of the reasons why we wanted something like this kind of double-edged sword into our game. We'll look at also how it interacts with the other magics and how it first came to be, as well as how does it play in the world itself. And then last, we'll look at kind of how it interacts with the world of Extrayus and the gameplay aspect. So you can kind of see kind of the steps that we put into when creating our magics.
So if you really like the topics that we're discussing in these lore drop segments, or if you have an idea of your own that you would like us to discuss, please let us know at our Couple of Nerds Discord, or let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. It would be awesome. Thank you so much.
Anything at all we'll take. But really, chaos magic was born really from my desire to have somewhat of a balance to what was already created as a very powerful magical system within in Extrayus, right? So this now represents the unpredictability and the uncontrolled nature of the universe.
Yeah, a sort of balance to the ordered nature of magic.
Right, because as we talked about in the time of Eden, which is this early period in Extrayus' history, magic was kind of everywhere. The elves and the Humes were just able to cast 9th, 10th, and creating magics that no one had ever seen before. But when writing that, you kind of realize, what did I just create? Because if this is true, that means my players are now looking forward to 10th and creating their own magic and being all powerful. And so it was kind of this like, oh no, what have I done? And I remember talking to you and being like, okay, we're really going to have to figure out to not make everyone want to be a sorcerer or a wizard because it's just going to be so broken. We're not going to be able to control it.
Yeah, it was tough at first, trying to figure out how we were going to make that work. And then slowly this idea of an antithesis to magic came out with this chaos sort of unpredictableness.
Yeah, and it kind of tied into, when we were building kind of the origin story and we had the reaping games. And so we kind of talked about like, okay, well, what could we make from that? And it kind of spawned initially of just being kind of this like backfire, and it wasn't necessarily a magical system yet. But then as we played in the initial part of the campaign and as the story kind of grew, just like our world, we kind of build as we go. And so chaos magic started becoming more of its own thing and slowly developed into a quintessential part of the magic system of Extrayus.
Yeah, and it was really born out of the reaction that the sort of planet had to these two external forces of the Fae and the demon coming together on the planet and sort of kind of duking it out in their own way.
Right. And I think... Right, and I think that makes that where it has that sense where it's like, it's not just, the DM's putting the brakes on magic and has some reason why we can't do crazy things. but it also was like, okay, but that could also make sense.
Yeah.
And the way I looked at it too is like there are in many different creation myths and stories, chaos is this primordial force, that kind of emerges over time just by nature. It's usually the bad guy.
Yeah.
But in essence, I wanted to capture that essence and put it into our world because just like in a lot of mythos, it's both this kind of impending doom, but also the thing that pushes people forward to grow.
Yeah, in its own way. Just like the void is a sort of survival mechanism for the planet itself, chaos is its own version of that, but with a more unpredictable side, because unpredictability is also the mother of like learning and exceeding.
Yeah, and then like that's what I love too, because part of being D&D and also building your homebrew world is you have both like the kind of the mythos behind it, but then you also have the mechanics. And so like it was kind of mechanically chaos magic brings kind of that fun of all those tables that everyone creates out there, all the random rolls, treasures, and all the magical surge and all the crazy ones. Well, we don't get to roll them very often. I kind of have this presence that the D100 is a very underutilized dice.
This is the DM that thought wild magic surges just didn't happen enough in the world.
No, and so, I like having you guys roll D100s. I think it's an underused dice. And so by having this sense of craziness and that what we can do is that now it makes it where these dice and these actions and these tables are used a lot more often.
Oh, yeah.
And so mechanically, as it works in the game, is that as you cast spells, there's kind of just like everyone is essentially a little bit of a wild magic sorcerer.
Just a little bit, yeah.
But it's more of as you get into certain regions, there are kind of dense pockets of magic, or of chaos magic, excuse me. And in those, obviously the chance is much higher, almost in some cases 50-50. Flip a coin, wild surge. But it also has where in those spaces you don't consume spell slots.
That's nice, I
guess.
guess.
You can cast magic every turn, but every single time is a coin flip if you're going to roll on one of these different tables that could potentially, like you always hated when you first decided to be wild magic, when you saw the resurrection one.
Where it changes everything you are, your species, your class,
you
everything.
Re-roll from the beginning.
Yeah.
And I knew that was the thing that stopped you. You're like, I'm not doing that because the chance of getting that and ruining my entire character development, I'm not going to try.
I worked so hard on Luna. She's got so much unknown backstory that even I don't know.
Yeah, and so it also creates this really interesting mechanic in that it does make magic, though powerful, a much more less frequent thing, because obviously the way we have it mechanically, you're not encouraged to cast magic so just haphazardly.
Yeah, and there are consequences. The more powerful the spell, the more powerful the possible consequence.
Right. So like imagine casting a fireball, but instead of a controlled explosion, you get a burst of energy that then turns it into a bunch of fiery birds that fly off in the different direction. That's the chaos that we're trying to look in and allows for all kinds of craziness to happen. Like I always loved places where they really put that kind of viability and that craziness, that chaos to magic, where it is so powerful that we are just tipping a little bit of the power, and that if we just dip too much, it is that much more powerful than we'd have no idea.
Oh yeah, it's this idea that can we really just control magic? Absolutely, of course not. There have to be instances where it just goes haywire and does its own thing.
Right, but you get in like games, especially like traditional D&D, and like with players, you guys just kind of look at like, okay, here's these spells, here's what they are, and here's what it's always going to be. So I feel like it lets you guys kind of not really have to worry so much into, especially with things like spell casting focuses, where now you don't even have to worry about materials.
It's easy.
Then as a spellcaster, you don't really have much to worry about.
Yeah, it's tough. I'm a little weird because even though I have a focus, I like using components. I think it's fun.
You do enjoy doing
I think it's so fun.
Flair.
Absolutely. I love it and I do it all the time. But chaos magic specifically was exciting but also terrifying to hear about, just because as a player, I am playing a magical class in the world of Extrayus in this campaign. And while right now I'm fine, once I get to casting higher level spells, because the consequences get a little worse, or at least
probability
gets higher. Yeah, not worse, but the probability gets higher of things occurring the higher you cast. So as I grow more powerful, that's going to become a much bigger issue. Like right now, it's not really a thought.
Yeah, it's pretty negligible right now, which kind of sucks because I'm like waiting, and we haven't really even had an opportunity to roll because with that fear, you guys have been kind of avoiding using magic as much as you can.
We've been trying to be really good about it, but also we're in a place where the continent we're on isn't really known for its magic, so it's akin to going back in time and showing people a flashlight.
Yeah, right.
You can't really do that.
And as we've learned in the story, there are many reasons for it, which we'll dive into later. But it is that kind of interesting where it was like, this big warning, and then we get to the start, and since we rolled for random of what continent we started in, it's like, oh, okay, they got this big warning, but nothing's not going to happen now for a while.
Yeah, so we really have to sit there and weigh the benefits and dangers of casting our spells, because it affects more than just us. There are native people who live on this continent that we should not be messing with too much, I hope. And it also makes every magical encounter more unique, right? Because as a player, you're used to having a certain set amount of spells usually, unless you're a druid or,
Right, or you
also,
find ways to regain.
One has kind of changed things as well, so I appreciate that nature of it. But it used to be where like you had your set spells and there was really no deviation from that. But now chaos magic sort of adds a unique flair to each engagement. So it's always new and fresh.
Right, yeah. And I think that's really what we wanted to really put into kind of the entire kind of plot of Extrayus, is this kind of fresh take on magic, fresh take on character development, and also a fresh take on how you build a homebrew world, where we are kind of building it as we go through the interactions, through the development of the story.
Yeah.
But really, if we're looking at like just the basic breakdown of the nature of chaos magic, is that like at its core, it's basically about just the change and unpredictability.
Yeah.
Kind of that little bit of pull off with the void about pushing things to its limits, but not in that same controlled way that the void pushes things to its physical evolutionary
a little more
peak.
fast and loose.
Right? This is a much more of like, hey, what if you had an arm on your back?
Yep.
Wouldn't that be great? Well, it might be helpful, it might not, but hey, let's give it a
Why
try.
not?
Chaos.
Yep.
And so that's really where it comes from. And as we look at the kind of the greater kind of look of our magical array, is really it represents that the fact that you have Fey and demonic kind of constantly clashing with each other.
Yeah, because they're from outside the dimension of Extrayus.
Right, yeah, they are outside forces.
Realm.
Yeah, they are the outside forces, the next set of rings in the array. And so they kind of, by kind of getting too close to creation, cosmic magic, they're kind of
triggered a response.
Yeah, their feud kind of blended into the core of Extrayus itself, thus creating chaos magic.
Birthing a new magic.
And so since the issue is that you have Fey magic, which is, as we'll get into more detail, more of the imagination, and the demonic realm is more of the emotion and that kind of power, the combination of those two is absolute chaos.
Yeah, you really can get somewhere with ultimate imagination and ultimate emotion.
And so that's really kind of that concept where we were like, okay, this has to be its own thing because of that nature and how it reacts. When all of those come together, it kind of now creates a balance. Whereas before, there was just absolute creation with cosmic, and there was just things being made, but that causes problems too. And there was unchecked growth, and we saw what it led to, the reaping games. And so by doing that and creating cosmic, there is now a better balance to the magical array.
Entropy now exists.
Right, exactly. And so that allows it to interact better and in more fascinating ways. Because of that, chaos itself doesn't have like a consciousness like we've explained with like the void and stuff like that. It just exists for randomness. And because of that, it's able to amplify all other types of magics, because it itself is just kind of a big chaotic battery.
Yeah, I get that, right? There couldn't really be a a sort of personality, because it's any and all personalities.
Yeah, exactly. And so the idea is that that's why when you tap into this magic surge, there is beneficial effects as well as negative consequences, because it's showing that it's not about the fact that it's like, oh, we're messing with your magic. It's that it's going to become so powerful and change that it's so uncontrolled and chaotic.
Oh man, that is pretty crazy. And so when chaos magic interacts with other magical systems, how does that interact? Like, how does it affect? We know how it affects, for example, void magic and such, but what about others?
So yeah, so the way to really look at it too is like, obviously spells like arcane or magic types like arcane, those are probably affected the worst. And that's just because they're already kind of these, hodgepodge ways of casting spells that normally a mortal being couldn't. I summon lightning through this ancient archaic way and these chants and these items, whereas a lightning, elem can just create it out of nothing.
So it's like someone found the instructions but doesn't know why.
It's like, yeah, or they found like the crib sheet to casting magic. And so because of that, it's already a pretty weak connection.
Yeah.
But when it comes to things like primal magic, which is usually a very strong connected magic, chaos takes a lot longer in order to actually affect that magic. Okay. So typically when a kind of a primal user is casting magics, they're less likely to see their magic be altered unless they are in a heavily dense chaotic zone.
For a long period of time, I imagine.
Or a very dense zone. Like they are very dense in density depending on how long various entities resided in those areas and that kind of nature. So you can go from an area with little to no kind of chaotic energy, which, like you were saying, is like the Mirren continent, which is very low, to the Hume continent, which is riddled with pockets of it all over the continent.
Oh, snap. So I was wondering, like, how did that come about? Because you said it was a clashing. Do those chaos points, or I don't know what they're called, but there's areas where chaos exists. What are they, places where the Fae and demons touched, or how does that work?
Yeah, and so really a lot of ways there's different factors, because obviously during the Reaping Games, a lot of Fae and demonic activity were spread amongst the continent. So it could be anything from a strong enough Fae presence to interactions between the demons and the Fae.
Oh, okay.
But really talking about, in terms of magic and magical items, really it's just always having that chance for any kind of spell to change. Because mostly we always think of chaos magic affecting, like, we were saying fireballs and other kind of spells. We never imagine like things like an example of like, look at, like, if you were to cast a healing spell, like you're just like healing word and you try to cast that, and instead you summon a bunch of butterflies that like swoop out and begin like healing everyone, like literally everyone, good guy, bad, all, and so you would never expect your healing spell to quite take.
I mean, technically it worked.
It worked, right? But so it's like that chance of, well, man, there could be a moment where that you're on the hook and you have to do it, and you might be banking on a magical change that could be in your favor.
But what if it goes bad?
Well, that's always that's chaos.
I know.
So really the last way I want to look at too, and like you were kind of saying, is like, how exactly is it affecting the world? And you kind of touched on it a little bit when talking about how is it expressed in the world. And the easiest way to look at that is that there are a lot of different key points spread amongst the world. Like there is a continent called Rashalem. Excuse me. A lot of these new names.
Country.
And it's a country. Thank you. It is actually raised hundreds of feet in the air.
Yeah.
Its entire like tectonic plate has been lifted into the air. So it's always been isolated from the rest of the continent. And what this is actually from a contest of strength between a demon and a fae.
Oh, snap.
So it was essentially basically like a drinking contest.
Yeah.
The fae bet the demon they couldn't do
I
it,
can
and
live with this.
the demon did it.
Oh.
And so in those areas, you'll see a lot more chaos because those two entities resided more in that region.
Wow.
And you'll see then, as it kind of changes, it also mutates certain creatures.
Yeah.
Because like I said, what would happen if you had an arm on your back? So what would happen if, say, a killer whale is capable of manipulating water psychically?
Oh no.
So then you have a whale that can create its own kind of water surfboard and kind of fly.
Oh, geez.
Which, as
That's
we'll
right.
talk,
and
we'll
they're
talk,
mammals; they can exist above water.
right? So I mean, who's to say what's to say that's not cool?
That would be awesome.
So there's different ways that it kind of changes a lot more than just kind of magic users, but it also allows for other kind of instances. Like I was telling you, it's like, what if a wolf could cast mirror image?
Yeah.
Like, that's chaotic as heck. Yeah. But imagine if you had 3 wolves all casting mirror image. Now 3 wolves looks like 12.
Oh no.
Right. So it would be
giant pack.
It creates this whole kind of idea where you never know, because traditional RPGs and especially like D&D, you get that idea of like, okay, low levels, we're facing wolves. They can howl. They can pack tactics.
We can take them.
They can do whatever, but it's like, yeah, but what if it's a wolf that can cast slow?
Yeah.
What if it's
Or
all these,
fear.
or fear, right? All these different things that you would never expect. And so now in our world and in our kind of RP, you kind of have to take every single creature as what could this potentially be capable of?
Oh my. And that leads me to another interesting question I have. Can it also affect like people like us, the players?
So as it is, without going into too much detail, like obviously people born within these kind of regions are going to see different effects onto them, both negatively and positively. There are certain nations that are trying to kind of use that to their benefit, kind of dealing with the negative consequence as well as obviously using it as a positive force when they can. So we will see as it goes through, as it does kind of affect. It mostly affects magic users, though, as if you are a non-magic user, chaos has no effect on you.
Oh, interesting.
It actually does, because there's nothing for you to change. So it only really changes the magical aspect of a player. Whereas the void is specifically the physical.
Yeah.
So that's how they kind of come into contrast with each other. So if you are a non-magical creature, now this means no magic in your body, you cannot do anything special, you're a normal boy.
Like our buddy Drexler.
Right? Like, or, Bogbean or V, these guys that don't have innate magical talents.
Yeah.
And so because of that, they are actually immune to these things.
Oh,
they're not going to
nice.
suffer because they can't trigger chaos because they can't cast magic.
At least some of us are protected.
So in some ways, yeah, they are refuges for characters and creatures that aren't capable of casting magics.
Oh, that's interesting. I never thought of it that way.
So yeah, so it does create little protection zones for certain classes. And with that too, it's in those certain regions, and as we as we call them, chaos rifts, and those are the locations specifically where these kind of contests and various fights between demonic and fey forces that created the strongest concentration. And those are areas where it is just very dense. That's where, there is unlimited magical potential, but a lot of explosion potential.
Yeah, that's the 50-50 we were talking about.
Yeah, and then another unique thing, and this is something that's very special, is that it's also a form of currency in the world.
Oh.
Because there's such a fear when it comes to casting magics, because essentially your next spell could be your last.
Yeah.
It's kind of commodified magical spell slots.
Interesting.
So if you're a person who's willing to cast magic, you can offer up a spell slot in exchange for gold.
Oh.
So you could say, hey, I will give you a 3rd level spell, perhaps a 30% chance of it blowing up in your face, for 300 gold's worth of resources.
Oh, I don't know if my head is worth that.
So there are societies where the rich and wealthy will have multiple low-level wizards around them who essentially act like they're casting through this indentured, basically, servant wizard who has to cast a spell, so many numbers of spells.
Or contracted.
As their contract is what they sold. So in some countries that you'll run into have this kind of barter system with magical spell slots, because they know that it's such a danger, but essentially, if people are struggling, they're willing to do whatever it takes.
So can you buy other commodities with spell slots?
Yeah, you could exchange it for food, resources, magical potions. You could go into the shop and essentially exchange spell slots for cash.
That's interesting. That is a brand new way of approaching
But
spells,
obviously
I think.
creates another kind of dangerous black market, as well as this idea of these kind of, these rich influenced, people with influence who can just control an army of wizards, not caring if they all blow up or turn into trees or goats start appearing on the
They're not
back.
blowing up, so I guess it must be
for
fine.
them. So that's really where it comes into, looking at it on the kind of role play aspect of how much chaos magic at this point has affected the entire culture of Extrayus.
Yeah, I think it means, we really have to be ready for anything that comes our way because it is so unpredictable. It really is this like overload feature for both adding power and risk to our adventures.
Yeah.
It could go off real great, but one wrong move or the dice rolls one way, not the other.
Yeah, and I know, and it's unfortunate right now because, like you said, through sheer luck, is that you guys aren't in an area that really has an opportunity to see these chaos points.
Yeah, we have surprisingly skirted away from them.
Unbeknownst, though, you guys have been fighting chaos creatures.
We have been.
Which obviously we'll talk about later in a future Traveler's Chronicle. But you guys have fought these kind of chaotically amplified creatures. And I think it's caused some of those battles to really kind of throw you guys off.
Oh, it's certainly added a new level of terrifying to D&D. If you thought little creepy children was the worst thing you could get, haven't visited Extrayus.
And then also, being that your character kind of has this very unique backstory to them, but Luna also even has her own separate mechanic when coming to operating in chaos.
Yeah, so because of who I am, what I am.
We haven't gone into that yet.
You don't know. But I have this weird ability to, I don't know, store, I guess, the chaos magic within me, sort of, and use it, but it could really hurt me if I'm not careful.
Oh, yeah, and we coined that the chaos overload feature.
Yeah, it's one that I am both, really interested in seeing how it works out, and also very scared for when I ever have to do that.
Yeah, it's more like, the way we kind of wrote it was more just because since your character had a much closer tie to the void, and the connection between those two, you were more of a receptacle now for that magic. But obviously, the more chaos you hold within yourself. But I think, it's one of those things where if you can balance it over the course of probably a few weeks and balancing your magics, you essentially could take a brief moment of immortality and cast a crazy wish spell and then snap back to who you are.
Oof.
But of course, you'll be breaking at the seams of chaotic energy.
Yeah, and it could potentially destroy me. So we'll see.
It'll be cool.
I'm, like I said, I'm both looking forward to it and not. It's kind of a thrill because...
And that's the point.
Well, whenever we're in tough situations, it's always good to have that little ace in the hole you can call upon and be like, okay, I know I don't want to have to do this, but I can if I want to. So it gives you this little massive boost if you really need to get yourself out of a tricky situation.
Yeah, and then depending on how dense of a chaos zone, you could also have the benefit of just having infinite spell slots.
I know.
So there could be a scene where Luna just decides to have to spare it, give
Pop
it all
off like a firework,
and just carry it all in and rapid fire spells. But that's the whole point, right?
Yeah.
The whole essence of doing this chaotic magic is just to have that chaos in our stories, in our role play, and at our table.
And I, for one, I'm super excited to see where that ends up. So it's gonna be great, I think.
Yeah.
But today we kind of went through and explored the origins, nature, and impact of chaos magic in our homebrew world of Extrayus. It's a sort of a force that brings both excitement and danger to our game world. In a world where it was just sort of creation, it really kind of brings a little bit of consequence to everything.
Right. And also, as always, we'd love to hear what any of you guys think about chaos magic, or if you have any similar concepts in your games out there. Please leave us a review and join in on us with this conversation.
Absolutely. Let us know in the comments below, or if you're super interested, you can join our Couple of Nerds Discord community for more in-depth discussions, exclusive content, and the opportunity to contribute to future episodes too. So if you have any ideas, please feel free to let us know.
And next time, we'll be diving into the mysterious and powerful Fey magic of Extrayus. What secret does it hold? I mean, that's up to you.
Ooh, I'm so excited to cover it. But thank you so much for tuning in today. Let us know what you think in the comments below. Like and subscribe as always. And thank you so much, guys. Have yourselves a good night.
Have a good one.